I thought it was just like urban legend that somebody had used a bladder bag filled with,
Drip mix.
drip mix to go light piles. This is the Wildfire Lessons Podcast. Our goal is to promote learning by revealing the complexity and risk in the wildland fire environment. We share the lessons. The learning that follows is up to you. Hi, I'm Kelly Woods, Director of the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center. On today's episode, Lessons Learned Center analyst Travis Dotson and I talk about incidents featured in our latest issue of Two More Chains. Two More Chains is, of course, the quarterly publication we produce at the Lessons Learned Center. Download the latest edition on our website, lessons.wildfire.gov. Inside, you will find a summary of each of the incidents we'll talk about today. You can also read a great interview I did with Great Basin Boise smoke jumper Shannon Orr. Shannon was directly involved in one of the incidents we'll discuss. As always, more information on each of these incidents and others can be found on our website. Click on the Incident Review Database tab and start searching. I hope my conversation with Travis piques your curiosity and you want to learn a bit more. Hey, Travis. How's it going?
Hey Kelly. Doing good. Excited to talk about what we got in store today.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at our recent issue of Two More Chains and some of the content in there, some of the intent behind the document, and then some of the incidents that we feature and with some of the lessons. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited that we're doing this, referencing Two More Chains, or I guess focusing on Two More Chains, the publication, right? It's like a podcast version of Two More Chains, something we've talked about for a while, and I think this is a great issue to start with. And
let's start real quick with, just for any listeners that aren't familiar with Two More Chains. Two More Chains is our quarterly publication that the Lessons Learned Center has been producing for is it 11, 12 years, something like that? It's been quite a while. It's really popular with some people. There's usually important, relevant topics are covered, sometimes pushing the envelope of discussion and sometimes highlighting things that people don't necessarily pick up on at first glance. So I'm really proud of the content that goes into Two More Chains. We always have a feature article where we feature one of our own, someone from out there in the masses of our wildland fire community with an interesting perspective that somehow ties into sort of the theme of the issue. So that's a pretty popular one. We've had everyone from, people who are fairly new in their career to folks who have been in the business for a long time. It's pretty cool insight. So that's what Two More Chains is, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just a venue. You know what I mean? I always feel like the Lessons Learned Center has this opportunity, right? Because all these reports are coming in, and it's our job to not only house them and make them accessible, but we read them, and so we kind of have a pulse on things. And what that ends up doing is we have this conversation, this ongoing discussion amongst our staff about, risk and what's actually happening out there, and mitigations. And, it's just this ongoing conversation because it's kind of our bread and butter. That's what we do.
Sometimes
and Two More Chains.
We highlight culture too, right? There's culture, there's fire culture, it can really cover a lot, like you say, the things that we're seeing in the reports that are sometimes really overt lessons and sometimes just a unique perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm saying is Two More Chains is the venue for those conversations that happen internally to then put that out there. You know what I mean? And as is the podcast. The podcast is the same thing. It's hey, here's this group of folks that are just consuming this this input, and then we have these different venues, and Two More Chains, like you said, covers just a variety of things, including culture, big questions, just real nuts and bolts lessons, all over the board. And we put it out 4 times a year, and it's not just a regurgitation of policy or anything like that. There's definitely times when people have they've pushed back a little bit on some of the content, and we're always able to say, hey, this is why, this is how it's tied to our mission. And then there's other times where it's just, man, sometimes it's just like heartfelt, tough stuff that's in there. And the one you were talking of, one of our own, which has always been part of Two More Chains. And I remember the original discussions around when we were talking about this publication before we even knew what it was going to be called. But I remember saying, hey, like, our workforce is amazing. Like, we have amazing people. We should just pick, we should just highlight some of our workforce that just, for whatever reason, we just have a lot of amazing people. I used to always say, if there's anything you want done, I guarantee you we have a seasonal for that, right? Like, we know somebody that knows how to pour concrete, and we have somebody that's a nurse, and we have somebody there. I bet you we have seasonals that are lawyers. Like, I know we've had that. You know what I mean? Our workforce is just so diverse, and we have so many skill sets, and just about anything you want done, there's a wildland firefighter that knows how to do that.
Yes, for sure.
And so, yeah, that one of our own was just like, man, let's just highlight our workforce. We have amazing people.
It's interesting, too. I think, there's sometimes really kind of peeling back that person and getting to see a lot more that sort of just personal interest piece. People certainly enjoy that. I enjoy when it's my time in the seat to do the interview. I really enjoy it. Yeah. You learn so much about people, and it's really cool. And I think the thing, broadly speaking, about Two More Chains, a publication and all of the contents in it, sometimes it resonates with people, sometimes it doesn't. But the thing of it is it's that dialogue generating thing, right? If you let us know you don't like it, we've still made you think. We're still generating some dialogue. But we'd love to get the feedback. It's always good to know if we're hitting the mark for people, or whatever. But yeah, this is just another tool that we use to push forward those 3 pillars of learning in the Wildland Fire Service: inquiry, opportunity, and dialogue. So those are always
which you can find
key.
In the publication Learning in the Wildland Fire Service.
Yes, Learning in the Wildland Fire Service, soon to be available hard copy.
Hard copy. Oh man,
soon.
I'm excited about that. You can get it digital, but hard copy is coming.
Yeah.
So then, I guess that kind of brings us into this particular issue of Two More Chains and the intent behind this. You want to talk to that?
Yeah, it's always an interesting discussion. Honestly, we publish one version, one installment of Two More Chains, and then literally the next week we start talking about the next issue. So it's an ongoing thing for us, and
there's always Two More Chains.
There's always Two More Chains. And our writer-editor, I feel like we have to give Mr. Paul Keller a good shout out here on this episode, because Paul is so good, keeps us on task, and we could not do this without Paul. So,
oh my gosh, every time Two More Chains is done and published and out the door, I just want to sit down and take a moment. And then
totally.
He's like, all right, let's start thinking about the next one.
Yes.
Oh,
well, and it was your idea, this issue where, to kind of look at some fires that maybe people aren't as familiar with, or maybe in some cases haven't even heard of. There's so many lessons. We have thousands of incident pages in our incident review database on our website, and And we all know some fires. There are some that every one of us knows what happened on the Hill, and those are great. We study those. We've learned a ton from them. But there's all these other incidents with all these other lessons, and you brought up the idea of looking at some of those, and I thought that was super awesome. And then one of the really cool pieces of that is we also have our new website, lessons.wildfire.gov, and we want people to get in there and click around, become familiar with the website, and we want to find any gaps in data or missing things, something that didn't migrate over to the new site correctly or whatever. And the best way to do that is for people to be clicking in there and telling us that something's missing. So that was such a benefit that we saw if we put forward some different incidents and got people looking at the IRDB, they'd become familiar with the user interface of the new site, and they'd help us find any gaps. So it just seemed like a perfect timing to take this on for this issue of Two More Chains.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in our discussions about possible topics, I remember just I was spending a lot of time in the incident review database because of the new website, and I spend as the analyst, I spend a lot of time in the database in general. But it was like, man, almost like a glimpse into my world, because I'm in there checking stuff randomly, and then I'm going, oh yeah, I remember that. And I open it up, and I'm just, every time I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Or, wow, I forgot about this lesson. Or, man, I actually hadn't spent a lot of time on this report. This is pretty curious. Check this out. Because periodically we'll do that, right? We'll send each other like, yeah. Hey, check this out. This is in our database, and it says this, and
Yeah.
We're all just kind of like, whoa. And then so Two More Chains, again, this is just, Two More Chains is a venue for an access into this, what I think is a pretty cool job that we have, which is living in this stuff. And the lessons that are out there, sometimes archived in some old PDF, we need, it's our job to make those accessible to the workforce out there, so those lessons can be realized. And this is a way to do it.
Yeah, and as you say, some of the lessons are still super applicable.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's great to, as you say, kind of dust off some of those reports and bring them forward. And the focus that we kind of took on this particular issue, that the incidents are all somehow related to firing operations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a way to group them, and I think it was I stumbled onto that theme, like I was like, oh wow, I remember this. Oh, I remember this, and I was like, oh, they happen to be firing ops related, and then so we started kind of looking for those, and it just it adds some continuity to it, and hopefully some discussions, because firing ops, we know it's like, what I always say is, you're literally playing with fire. Mm-hmm. Like, that's where that saying comes from.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Meaning you're not fully in control.
Yeah.
There's or whatever, however people want to say, nature. The nature gets a say, or the fire gets a say in what happens. And when you're putting fire on the ground, that's you're not always. We're not the best at. I guess it's impossible to predict exactly what's going to happen when you put fire.
Yeah, so many variables. You put,
Yeah.
Certainly all the, fuels, weather, topography out there. And then you put all the humans out there, and the scenarios of potential outcomes are pretty significant, right? There's a bunch of them. And
animals.
Animals, yes. Gators in
That's right.
safety zones. We'll get to that. But yeah, for sure. And it's interesting to look at all these reports sort of grouped like that, right? And think about the similarities, the differences. And I think some of these are from the, mid 90s. Some are from, into 2011, and I don't know. So it's just interesting to see that progression. And it's also interesting to see how the reports changed, over time as well. And so looking at it comprehensively with that lens of, hey, these are all firing ops scenarios. It's kind of cool to group them that way.
Absolutely, and looking forward to future times that we do something similar in Two More Chains, because you think about it, you go, oh, let's talk about engine ops. All right, let's talk about initial attack. Hey, let's talk about camp related things, right? Believe it or not, like we have a lot of lessons about just camp ops. I mean, people get run over and fall down and have heart attacks and get burned trying to make coffee. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, there's all kinds of stuff.
Like, the danger's just not out on the line.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to look at them kind of comprehensively. Should we talk about the first one that we featured?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Bryce Canyon fire.
Bryce Canyon. Do you remember hearing about it?
I do remember hearing about it because I was working in the Great Basin at the time that this happened. So I do remember hearing about it, but I had forgotten many of the, nuances. And of course, I know a few of the people that were involved too. So I think that it's kind of like that, the bullseye, mm-hmm. You're more likely to remember the closer you were to the event. And of course, if you know people who were involved, then you remember things a little bit better. So it's the Bryce Canyon fire entrapment from Utah, and it took place in 2002.
2002, yeah. And it's just an engaging story, partly because of the setup, right? It's one of those fires where it's like, oh man, here's the 10% that we train for and that we kind of imagine, like if this would be a really good sand table exercise. You know what I mean? When you do a sand table and people are like, well, how often is that really the case? You're right, it's not that often. But man, when it does, when it's going and blowing and you got to make like decisions quick and all that time pressure and stuff is just, it's right there. Fire's moving quick and there's high consequence stuff. It's initial attack. It's emerging and that kind of scenario is just always appealing, and it's fun to put yourself in those shoes of the decision makers.
Yeah, for sure. And it was all, as often obviously is the case, everything was happening pretty quickly here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it was like they already had an IC3 assigned and there was engines, and the focus of this report obviously is on the smoke jumpers. They jumped it, but there was already kind of folks engaged on the ground, and they happened to be able to get to a piece of the fire that needed work, and it's a load of 8 mixed load folks from different bases, and then even within that they split up because they're not all in the same place when it all goes down. But it's just one of those deals where it's like, man, the fire's pushing from the minute you hit the ground, and you're having to make big decisions, including, like, it's to me the way I envision it. And obviously we have the interview with Shannon, who was there. I'll plug that right from the beginning. It's like, go read one of our own, because it's Shannon who was there at the Bryce Canyon fire.
Yeah, Shannon Orr from the Boise Smoke Jumper program.
Yeah. And he's still there jumping like now, which is part of the whole other crazy story. But it's obvious to them that they need to do some firing right off the bat. And you're in grass and sage and it's fire weather, right? It's just one of those deals where, and that stuff can get dicey. And I wouldn't say that the firing operation really had anything to do with this, what happens with the fire, right? It was like a weather event, weather and topography kind of alignment is the way I read it. But anytime you're putting fire on the ground in those conditions, it's just, the times I've done it, it's just kind of tense.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they're right off the bat, I remember they needed to create some black to, not only for the gear, but just as a place, to go. And I don't remember how long. Do you remember exactly how long it was? Like, it wasn't that long from when they hit the ground to when the wind just lays down and puts the column, everything right over the top of them. It's a group of 5. So there's 8 jumpers there, but only 5 of them are in this spot. And so this big wind, and it just lays down on top of them. There's a group of 5 that had regrouped at the jump spot, and it's like okay, run for your life. Basically, it's the way I read it.
Same with me. Yeah, just running for your life. And it's one of the crazy things in the story is 3 of the jumpers end up a long ways away. I mean, on foot, right? And they got to ride back to ICP. I mean, they got to ride back to the fire from like civilians or whatever. Like, it's so crazy to me to think about that and think about how that might have been different in today's world. I don't know. But yeah, they literally, and Shannon, one of the folks that ran, he's a runner. I mean, he's my neighbor. I see him running all the time. He's a runner. He's always been a runner. And he told me he was like sore for days, and that was obviously 21 years ago. So at that point in time, he was a damn good runner, right? And so like to that running for your life and then just getting a ride back, just what a crazy scenario to live through. And not to mention the shelter deployment that took place on the fire while they were running. It's a lot going on in this event.
Shannon and the person he was with just kind of outran the fire one direction. Another person ended up meeting up with them. The solo person went kind of cross country a little bit and then popped out on the road with them. Then the other 2 went down a 2-track and then ended up kind of bumping into the black, and they're the ones that ended up pulling shelters and hunkering down in some shelters. And the way they describe it is it's like, they were just using it to shield themselves from the heat. They were kind of like, well, we've got these things. Why don't we, use them, right?
Yeah, I actually wrote down one of the quotes because I thought it was good. They deployed their shelters to protect themselves from fire whirls and hazards associated with the wind-borne debris.
There you go.
Right? Yeah,
like
wind-borne
that seems
debris.
like a good tool to use for that. Like,
yes, it does.
That's what those things are designed for, right? And because it's like, just because it's survivable without a shelter doesn't mean that you shouldn't, use this piece of equipment that is designed for exactly the scenario you're in.
Yeah,
because I think it's not like they just laid down and laid in the shelter. And then I'll plug the interview with Shannon as he talks about what the jump base did immediately after, right? And hey, we did sand tables in 2002.
Yeah, which was sand tables, the Wildland Fire group collectively, like our, leadership development program that was getting started. Folks like Jim Cook, if people remember Jim Cook, or, Chris Wilcox, who's now, with the Park Service. Folks like that were really instrumental in studying the staff ride concept and the sand table concept from the Marine Corps, and they were just really getting started. So it says a lot about the jumper program that they picked up on that and saw this as a really cool opportunity to run the scenarios out in that sand table format and learn from these events.
Yeah, and just talk about it internally, you know what I mean? Say, hey, here's our story. It's a version of storytelling, right?
Exactly.
And storytelling happens to be the venue we use for passing on lessons, primarily, with our peer group, whoever that happens to be. And it's a compelling story. So
for sure,
go check it out. And the lessons, I kind of defer to Shannon on those.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, because they're just so personal, and he's got some that just focus on and I'm always like, I don't know about intuition. Sometimes, I mean, I totally get that, and I support that idea of voicing intuition. But sometimes it's more than intuition. It's just like the things that are happening. It's just like, hey, this is this is a dicey situation, and we don't have a lot of tools other than this really useful one, which is the tactical pause. Like, it's a really useful thing. And it is a tactical option whether it's your gut or your intuition or a series of events, or you see the error chain or the Swiss cheese model, or whatever your way of making sense of, having your hair in the butter, you know what I mean, is like, you can do a tac pause. And it's something that's universally recognized, and well, I don't know if I should say universally recognized, but it's a common term.
Yeah.
And it's useful.
It is. And it definitely, I think, if folks haven't read that report, that is a really good one. Bryce Canyon, in our incident review database, and certainly read Shannon's interview in this issue of Two More Chains. I really appreciate his honesty and, just doing the interview.
Absolutely.
All right. Should we bump on to something else?
Yeah. Talk about dropping fire on firefighters. How about that?
Let's do.
Another instance that, like, I bet you it's happened a lot more than we know about on paper, right? But these are two pretty specific events that we have in our incident review database. And the Waters Gulch, is that the title of the one where it's Lumigel, right?
Yeah.
And they're doing a prescribed fire, and the pilot actually happens to notice that, well, there's a human down there.
Somebody down there.
Yeah, and it ends up being a weather observer that had, they wanted some weather from a very specific spot, and kind of classic communication struggles or whatever, and it culminates with them dropping fire, right? Gelled gasoline within, what is it, like 20 yards or 20?
Yeah, it's like super close. Yeah.
Yeah. Of somebody down there, and that firefighter, she ends up like just bailing down the hill, like, I'm out of here, and she goes out the bottom. But yeah, totally, one of those instances where it's just kind of alarming, like, oh wow, that could have been bad.
Yeah, for sure. And further kind of complicating it, there wasn't good radio commo with her, and that would be even creepier, I guess. You have no commo and you're getting Lumigel dropped on you, and I also, as I recall, the person taking the weather observations didn't have really much fire experience. There were that's so I can only imagine how terrifying that would have been for her.
For everybody, I keep putting myself in different people's perspective, right? Say you're that weather observer, and that obviously is terrifying, and also that thing about maybe you don't have as much experience. I think whenever I'm new and inexperienced, I'm always questioning myself about, is this really dangerous? You know what I mean? Maybe I'm just not very confident, but I'm just like, maybe this is just kind of how it goes, and I shouldn't be alarmed or whatever. Do you know what I mean? I'm constantly questioning my own appetite, I guess, or tolerance.
Yeah.
For risk, and then I think about, say you're the burn boss, and you're catching bits of it. Say you hear your pilot like, okay, it's a go, and you're feeling good, like, all right, we're putting some fire on the ground, and then you hear the pilot go, hold up, there's somebody down here. Then, I mean, as the burn boss, I would be terrified.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. The individual that had the fire dropped on her described herself in the report as the sacrificial lamb, you know.
Oh my gosh.
And it's also interesting, you know, when you think about, I think this event took place in 1999. And she, the individual, Anna is her name in the report anyway, and she asked them, you know, hey, could we talk about this? And they said, sure, but probably not today. I was thinking about just AARs and the way we've evolved with, let's talk about it now, and let's this is significant, right? Everybody probably was pretty nervous and that kind of thing. So it is a really interesting story. And the report is interesting. And like I said, I think it's one of those where we've evolved in a lot of ways from here, but there's good stuff in here to look at it. But I definitely say it's worth people's time to click on that and read this Waters Gulch incident. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it helps you, I think, helps me walk through, man, how would I deal with that? Because, you know, you've got the operation, right? You know that somebody within your organization just had this harrowing experience and you've got a burn to get done. How are you going to kind of either compartmentalize or carry on? And it's just all that, you know, how do we take care of our folks and carry on with the mission, if that's the right thing to do. Yeah.
And I also think that we have so many people who are so engaged and help our fire programs, you know, all over, implement burns or work on wildland fires. And they might not be, you know, people who have tons of fire experience, but they're serving a huge function, right? Like taking weather in this scenario. Or you remember a few years ago, there was the KMP incident where somebody was running a logistics mission into the incident, got a flat tire, you know, not someone who's has a ton of fire experience, and that, how do you brief them? How do you ensure that, you know, they're going to be in a spot that's not going to be adversely impacted by
or
fire.
How to use the radio.
Or how to use the radio. All those kinds of things that start to be a factor when we take for granted that, oh yeah, everybody knows, but maybe they don't, and they're serving a huge role and super important to the operation, but they need to you know, be able to take care of themselves, communicate, do all the things that might not come second nature to them in that scenario.
Yeah. And we've got multiple instances of that kind of thing. I mean, and related to that, you know, it's not like dropping fire on people is a complete outlier, because right on that same page we have the Clark Peak. And because that was in the Southwest area, I remember hearing about this like right away. I was like, oh man, did you hear? Like, Silver City Hotshots got ping pong balls dropped on them. You know, and at the time I was just kind of like, is that for real? You know? And then I talked to some people that were there, and they're like, oh yeah, like there was people like catching them in their hard hats.
Yeah.
And God. So that's just this little blurb on there about, you know, in the Clark Peak fire, they were setting up and obviously doing aerial ignitions, and I don't know if it's wires got crossed or you know, obviously the communication line wasn't complete, and then they just, you know, they dropped balls on the crew.
Yeah. Literally, balls got dropped.
Yeah, they dropped the ball. More than one.
Yes. It's interesting reading that, the Clark Peak one. It's a similar incident, except it's all fire people involved. Yeah. And so it's interesting, again, like to read them together, which is part of the intent of this issue of Two More Chains, to kind of see how it plays out. You know, this poor gal that's not a fire person, you know, goes home, and I think it said she took a sleeping pill even, right? Like she's super stressed, whatever, you know, but in the Clark Peak, it's like everybody starts, the chain of communication takes place, it gets shut down, and it gets dealt with like really differently. Not to say one's necessarily better or whatever, but it's just so different. And it was interesting to see how, everyone from the ops section chief to, the crew boss or the superintendent of Silver City. Everybody's involved, getting it stopped, talking about it immediately versus the other one. So
absolutely. And part of that's infrastructure, right? If you have a incident management team, you have a safety officer and you have a ops chief and you have all of that stuff. And, it's
versus a prescribed fire, right?
Prescribed fire, especially in that era, it's also interesting to note that we are actually starting to do that with prescribed fires is have, it's like, oh, hey, we have these incident management teams, like, why don't we use that same structure or even the same teams to implement these things? But so part of it is obviously structure and what's possible. But then also part of it is just credibility, I guess, or whatever, and I mean, if the hot shots say, hey, wait a minute, like people wait a minute. But if you're some random weather observer that runs for their life and says, hey, wait a minute, they're just like, oh, not right now,
Yeah, we'll talk about it, just not today.
We'll talk about it, just not today, right?
Yeah.
And so, it's good to think about who has voice in our business and who has, credibility.
Or who do we listen to, right?
Exactly. But I'm not saying right or wrong. It's like stuff like that happens. Like we're dealing with, like, don't forget, man, we're dropping fire out of helicopters and there's people on the ground. And, I remember I have instance, I was ignitions back when there was ignitions. Now it's firing bus, right? But it was a prescribed fire and the helicopter was doing interior, kind of S-turns back and forth. And I was on a ATV going down the flank and the helicopter just happened to bank enough that when it went up like that, one of the balls went across the road, like it bounced across the road into the green. And I remember jumping off the ATV and running over there and trying to throw the ball back into the unit and trying to call the helicopter at the same time, like, hey, make that turn sooner, And so it's like that this stuff happens, right? We're literally, and just we either get, it's not that we get numb to it, but maybe we just get familiar with this level of intensity and risk that we're dealing with. And again, I don't know if it's a tack pause or just just like, hey, remember, we're dropping fire from the air with a bunch of people on the ground.
Yeah. I really think, though, having those coupled together like that in this document and reading them in the same sitting it will be sort of enlightening or interesting to folks.
Absolutely. Should we go on to the next one?
Yeah, 320 road entrapment.
Yeah, this one is pretty wild because it was on the Coal Canyon fire, which a lot of us remember that name because there was a fatality on the Coal Canyon fire during an initial attack. Trampas Haskevitz died in an engine, an entrapment. Pretty wild story. So that happened on August 11th, right? But this event that we're focusing on, kind of in that theme of what you might not remember, this happened the next day. This is a completely separate event, and not to take away anything from the lessons that we can learn from the fatality, but that one I know got a lot more visibility and focus, and this happened the next day. And I keep thinking of, man, think about being assigned to an emerging Type 3 fire, and that yesterday there was a fatality.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as I was reading this. This, of course, was South Dakota in 2011, right? And I was thinking about that, all those, as this story plays out, and it's the narrative is pretty detailed. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, what was that like for those folks on this fire, as, fire intensities building and whatever, thinking about the fatality the prior day? It would be hard. It would be hard to sort of separate your mind and just focus, sort of compartmentalize and just focus on your operations of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got a fire going, in this case, like a going fire. Like it's type 3. They'd ordered a type 2 team that was inbound and the reason they call it the 320 road, obviously that's where the event happened. It was on the 320 road. But the Coal Canyon entrapment fatality, you know what I mean, is a way to distinguish distinguish this event from the fatality. So it's like the Coal Canyon 320 road. And that's what they're dealing with, is like, hey, this thing's going, there's an incoming type 2 team. And again, this is one of those spots where it's like, hey, we have a chance to make a difference. We have an organization. They've got division supervisors. They've got task force leaders. They've got folks assigned, and they're doing a pretty major firing operation. One of those types of things, like we're gonna back off to these roads, figure out how to tie it together, and try and put some black in between us and the fire, and do what we do. And that's when this whole deal goes down, which again is actually a pretty enjoyable assignment. I have to admit, that's actually a fun way to fight fire. And in this case, they've got a plan, and they've got everybody lined out. And again, like you said, this report is really easy to read because it's got great diagrams. It's a facilitated learning analysis, right from kind of like the heart of FLA popularity.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to read. It's very descriptive, lots of detail. It's easy to follow. At first they're just like, hey, we've got this dozer check line. If we could get it to there, we can kind of check things up. And they do it. They get to the check line, but then the main fire is already there, and it becomes apparent. We need to keep going. That's what I always say about check lines is just like, it's line to nowhere, right? I mean, in some cases, and it's hanging it up. It was obvious that wasn't really an option, so they had to keep going. Again, nothing other than just normal fire ops, and then they come to a spot where there happens to be kind of a bowl, and they fire past it, and then so you can just imagine you're all spread out. You've got some fire, and you got engines kind of and crews kind of spread out, and then it spots right behind where some of the vehicles are parked, and then it just kind of from that point on, it just kind of. And I would really advise going and reading this, because it just sounds like a scramble.
And it's a scenario, I think, that so many of us we have our own, slides, if you will, or our own times when we've been in these kind of situations, this similar type of assignment, similar type of conditions. And and I think just being a well-written report puts you there too, right?
Absolutely. And then they did great stuff. But one of their rigs caught fire. The back end of one of the rigs caught fire, and they couldn't get to it because it's hot, right?
Yeah.
And then they've been faced. They got faced with the dilemma that I think a lot of us that have worked on engines. Well, maybe I don't know how common it is, but I remember one time having to decide. Somebody wanted me to put a vehicle that was like. It was on fire, and they wanted me to put it out, and just happened to be, it was a law enforcement officer. And I was like, hey, sorry, man, like, we're a wildland. It says right here in my rules that I can't put vehicle fires out. And they were just so disgusted with me. I remember they were just like, are you kidding me? I was like, no, we're here that if it goes into the the grass, we can put that out. But and so they had this kind of like, oh, what do we do? And they put it out, which is great. They put the back of the rig out. There's a picture in there, which to me just illustrates like the intensity of the moment, right? If anytime the back of your rig catches fire, like it was
That's pretty intense.
yeah.
Well, and they used, as I recall, they got the fire extinguisher from one rig to put the fire out enough to get the fire extinguisher from that rig out of the back, and then use that and put the fire out that way. So I mean, that's always we're going to be a champion for fire extinguishers too. But when you're dealing with a vehicle fire and stuff, the fire extinguisher's pretty nice compared to, pulling your engine over, having maybe more exposure again, or whatever, but just getting the fire extinguisher out, putting the fire out.
Yeah.
It's designed for that purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, the rig's not the only thing that's on fire.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Like, don't forget, this is, it's starting to go over the road, and and so you're dealing with a whole bunch of different things. And I think the leadership dilemma, this is just a good thing to be putting through your mind if you're a person that is working on crew boss or task force leader or division or whatever. Is just like, man, how are you going to, because the description in there is just like, it was hard to keep track of where folks were. And that was one of the lessons that we highlight there, is just like, roll call's really helpful. And having done it or practicing it or thinking of doing it, the sooner you can get that roll call and get that acknowledged. And they make a real specific distinction that they did it on their TAC channel initially, right? And then they put it on command. And because I know that as overhead, you're when you don't have information, you start making stuff up and you start worrying. And the sooner that you can at least know that all your resources are accounted for, then it helps you check that off and move on. And sometimes when we're the ones that are in the moment, it's hard to appreciate how important that is. You know what I mean? If you just put the rig out, like, yeah, I'm here, it's almost like you're annoyed by the, at least I am, by the roll call. But it actually is really, for the common operating picture, it's important to be able to do that. And as a middle management or middle leader, you know what I mean, crew boss and task force, you need to be able to do that for all of your sources at a pretty regular basis, and especially in an event like this, because you need to pass that on, because that common operating picture is how people are going to decide. And it could be that the roll call not being done is holding up some major operation or whatever.
For sure. I think one other thing in this particular report that got me thinking was just they had the conversation about, dropping tools or things like that. Like, when do you drop your tools, or if you drop your radio, how much time, when minutes can be critical, do you spend looking for a radio versus getting out of, the situation? And I think the same thing could be said about the truck. I mean, in this case, they had time and they put the truck out with the fire extinguishers. But at what point do you say, screw the truck, right? I'll take whatever is coming for, burning up a truck, but at least I'll be fine, right? And I thought that was interesting, because some of the people dropped their tools and made that conscious decision, and then these other things, the radio and the truck, were also at play. And I think thinking about that in your own head, like in a scenario, what would that be like? Going, wow, okay, do I look for this, or do I just run? And you never know how much time you have really in something like that, So I don't know. I thought that was a good lesson to consider when reading this report.
You're so right, because it's a catch-22 in a lot of ways. And we talk about it in a lot of different contexts. The most famous, is like, why did people keep the chainsaw, when they're hiking up the the hill, or why did they take a moment to set it down in a place where it wouldn't burn or whatever? And there's that whole dilemma of like you said, dropping packs, dropping tools, and then the mindset that puts you in. It, you know, sometimes it's that psychological safety or kind of switching gears of like, this isn't normal anymore. There's that whole thing. But there's also the consequence of doing that, and it you know what I mean? Because a lot of times we'll throw rocks at people and we'll be like, shoot, man, if I was in that scenario, I'd throw that chainsaw. I wouldn't care, you know what I mean? But if you're the person that comes back, like it was just a pulse and, you know, it turns out it was all right, but you show up at the trucks without a chainsaw, like how do we say, hey, good decision, you know, I'm glad that you value your life more than that equipment. Don't worry about it. Like, is that what we do to people? Or do we say, you know, WTF? You came back without the saw? You know, so-and-so brought their saw.
Yeah.
It's up there on the hill. Or the alternative is you kept it too long and it slowed you down and you didn't make it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's such a tough, and to me it's that it harkens back to the shelter. You know, when do you pull the shelter out? Just because you can survive doesn't mean that you just grin and bear it until you know you'll die unless you get in the shelter, right? It's like, no, we want people to pull the shelter before that. We want people to err on the side of dropping the tools. But we need to reinforce that, especially as leaders, whenever that comes to light. We need to say, hey, yeah, man, good call.
Yeah, and reading this report, that's a great opportunity to start that conversation, right?
Exactly.
As a leader, or to ask questions as a crew member, like, "Hey, what do you think of this?" or whatever. It's like it just starts the conversation, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's a chance to lay out expectations, right? You know, if you read this as a group or you highlight a certain section and you go, okay, on my engine, right, us 4 people right here or whatever it is, here's my expectation. I want you to err on the side of ...
Yeah. But this forces or is an opportunity to have that conversation in a training or, learning environment rather than like when the truck's on fire.
Yeah. Yeah. It's worth a discussion, just like you said. And these reports are really good for that kind of stuff. And remember, I always say, and in those instances, you can use the events that are in the report as the catalyst to that discussion. But if you just nitpick and say, well, they should have done this, if you stay in that realm, it's not as useful as saying, all right, I think I would be worried about, or this is my, think about the next fire, the next assignment, or the time that you're going to be in that. Keep your conversation in that context rather than what they did. Because it doesn't matter what they did. You're never going to be in that situation. You're going to be in a different one. So you need to talk about the one that you're going to be in.
Exactly. Yeah. Should we talk about Fiddler's Island?
Oh, man, my favorite.
2011?
Yeah. Anytime there's an alligator in the safety zone, I was like, that's a good story.
That's got babies and has lost her fear of humans.
That's right. I was so, I mean, I've been there. I did a lot of push-ups for feeding an alligator one time. But I can't, that briefing has got to be awesome, right? And it's just like, all right,
Yeah,
safety zone's back down to the pond. Oh, but just heads up, because there's a mama gator in there. She's got some hatchlings, and she's not afraid of humans. So, just another thing on the list.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
And it was the pond. It was I think they were calling it a dip site. But I remember in the report, one of the engine captains is like, "How do I refill my engine with the gator in the pond?"
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm a Western girl. I mean, I've certainly done some time down in Gator country, but like I'm not that familiar with, like how do I not make this mama gator mad? How do I avoid this? How fast can they go? Like, I mean, I don't know that much about gators. So I'd have been like, wow, especially being a former repeller and dip site manager. What do you do there with a gator in your dip site? So yeah, it's pretty funny.
Is there a hand signal for gator?
Totally. Yeah.
The Fiddler's Island, the other thing that I would plug, again, this is another FLA, Facilitated Learning Analysis, and the way that they did this, and I remember an FLA team or an incident review team always has this dilemma, right? It's just like, man, there's a lot of people involved, so that means there's a lot of perspectives involved. And it used to be like we went out with the mission to, okay, let's find the facts and the things that happened. And I appreciate reports that get written that way because it's very factual and matter of fact, right? And we have them all across the spectrum now. But the way that they approached it in this case, because there was so many different groups involved, and there was some pretty dramatic differences in how they experienced the event, is they just went like engine by engine or person by person in some cases of their perspective, and they just embraced it. Like, this is the way that engine 1 experienced it. This is the way that engine 2 experienced it. This is the way that task force leader experienced it. And some of them are drastically different. I mean,
yeah, it's interesting.
All the way from oh my gosh, we almost died, or somebody almost died, to why are we even doing this report? Like, this is just fire. Mm-hmm. And I think there's different experiences just because of where people were at. Like, it was different on the tail end than at the front. And then there's also just different ways that people experience the same event. And I think for our reporting culture to embrace that and say, yeah, here's all the different experiences. I think when I first read that report, I was frustrated by it, and now I can appreciate it a little bit more and just like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too that, one of the other lessons in there is about the terminology, of burnover, entrapment, those kinds of things. And so that's even more interesting, that conversation in the context of all of the perspectives. Like, why are we doing this report versus entrapment? Is it entrapment? Is it burnover? What is what is it? So thinking about things and giving it a read and thinking about those terms and how you may or may not, based on the information, categorize that, kind of interesting.
And the baggage of those terms as well, right? Like, I just think so, I mean, we didn't mention it, but the 320 road is actually called, the title on the report page is the 320 road entrapment avoidance. And so the whole perspective of that report is that they did this amazing fighting to avoid entrapment. I think that scenario meets the NWCG definition of entrapment, which I think that was actually one of the catalysts for us kind of looking into this at the time. It was just like, wow, we go to some pretty extensive lengths to
not call something an entrapment.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? They're like, no. It was just that my escape route was compromised. Like, that's that's part of the definition of entrapment. And again, there is a definition, and I think the point is always just like, hey, this is actually a fairly common occurrence in our business, right? It's not as clean as we might make it seem. That's why I'm always kind of like, hey, let's just let's note the times that this happens, so that we can have a full accounting of it, and we can change our perspective on how common it actually is to for our folks to be in entrapment situations.
And by calling this an entrapment, like this particular event, it doesn't take away from the really good work that was done, the super smart decision making, the fast thinking, the tactical soundness, whatever you want to say. It doesn't take away that from that. It doesn't change the actions taken on the road that day that we can learn from, right?
It's not a bad thing. I think that's the kind of unspoken assumption is that entrapment's a bad thing. And I think the data says it's a part of how we fight fire. That's what happens periodically when we fight fire. And I think we would all prefer that wasn't the case, right? We all want it to be like, no, we have LCES. And, that ensures that we're never in a life-threatening fire behavior related scenario, right? That's the whole intent. But that's not actually how it happens. And I'd rather it just be like clear text, right? Like this is how things are. And it's just, we literally have fight fire aggressively. Like that is half a fire order, right?
Yeah.
I challenge
but provide
you to fight
for
fire.
Safety first, which means you can't get entrapped, Travis.
Yeah, I got issues with that circular logic there, but I challenge you to fight fire aggressively and never be entrapped.
Yeah, for sure.
You can do the other half. You could provide for safety first, but it's not going to involve fighting fire aggressively.
Yeah, that's probably a whole nother topic, a whole nother episode for us.
Yeah. You could let me rip on that at a different time. Probably not something advisable. But back to Fiddler's Island. It's a team, an incident management team, and they've got this road. They need to the fire's coming, and they need to burn this road, and they combine forces, Division Charlie and Division Delta, kind of like, hey, let's link up. And it's a dead end road, and at the dead end is the dip site that has the gator in it, also identified as a safety zone. And they've got all the engines lined up north, facing north on this dead end road, and they're going to fire it out. And they had a plan to start in the middle and take it both ways. And then that got altered. They said, no, let's just start, on the lower end and take it all the way north. And then the fire, there's 3 fingers they talk about in there, and the third one is the one where it's like, okay, it's not going to work. We didn't get there fast enough. And in the process of that, there's just lots of chaos and lots of confusion. There was a hand crew that came in kind of late, didn't even get their radios programmed all the way because it was time to go, and all the normal things that happen with operations. It all sounds pretty normal, and they had fire. At one point, I think Engine 1 captain is like, hey, is it normal for fire to be hitting the side of the engine and going underneath and right over the top of it? Asking the question, I think trying to communicate, because sometimes it's hard to be that clear text, even though we promote the idea of clear text. It's hard for us to say, hey, my engine is taking direct flame hits, and it seems like everybody else is kind of just okay with this. Like, you want us to keep going, or it's just and in their experience in the report anyway, they didn't really get an answer when they tried to bring it up. I think in a tactful way, and that wasn't everybody's experiences. The folks that were further back didn't have that happen. And so anyway, it's just there's a lot of good. I think it's worth the read. This one I had to actually I had to go pretty slow and read through it to really make sure I understood what was going on, because there's a lot of different moving parts. And
I actually had to print this one out because it just was like, because that, like you said, it was a little frustrating at first to have so many perspectives, and you're kind of like, oh, really? I mean, when you're hearing from the incident training specialist, you're like, what?
Yeah.
But it is worth it because you need that context then also to get to the lessons and some of those perspectives. So yeah, but I did have to print this one.
And it's got some good images, and there's at least one, Google Earth type thing where it has all the engines lined out, and eventually, if you take the time, you can understand it. And it also has that element of when we combine forces, right? Okay, Division Charlie, Division Delta are both operating there with resources from those. How clear are the assignments? It's kind of the same thing that happens when we operate with a group inside of a division. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like the most common one is a structure protection group. And then the division supervisor of that area. And teams have different ways of clarifying exactly how that's going to work. Sometimes it happens with a firing group, like happened on the Nuttall fire, right? You had a firing group bringing fire down and a firing group supervisor operating within the physical division, right? And that whole ICS structure. And there's plenty of ways to deal with it. It's just that you got to tell people how it is.
Yeah.
Right. And what lanes folks are in. And that was another thing. It's like, hey, you've got a division soup here, but they're not on their division, and some of their resources are here. And it seems like, but there's not any formal designation like, okay, now Division Charlie is now going to act as ... You know what I mean? And I understand that sometimes it's just, hey, you just got to kind of go with the flow. I'm not saying everything has to be lined out, but it does create confusion, especially if you get in a really dynamic scenario like that. It can complicate things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, yeah, super good ones in there. And then we move on to Dutch Flat, which in terms of reports is also really interesting to read for a completely different reason.
Yeah, for sure. Lots has been redacted.
Redactions. And it's, the copy we have is like, it looks to me like they literally printed a copy and then blacked all the names out.
Yeah.
And then scanned it back in, which, was a common, like that's how a lot of the initial reports that came to the Lessons Learned Center, that's just what they looked like.
Yeah, this one is 1996 out of Nevada, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's interesting just to look at those types of reports. Familiar scenario, though, in terms of like, firing operation, I could put myself there, and it's a little harder to work through just because of the redactions. And then also it's just a bad scanned copy, but.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting who was doing the firing operations in this one too, right? That's different. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So that's the kind of the headline or the like, ooh, part of the report is it was the IC ops chief, 2 ops chiefs, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And a division.
From a Type 2 team, right? The Type 2
it's a Type
IC.
2 team. Yeah, it's not like it's the Type 4 IC. No, it's the Type 2 IC.
Yeah.
And both ops chiefs and a division supervisor that, and it's easy to, and they do a firing operation, and then a firewall comes and somebody gets burned, and that's why the report. And it's easy to, on the surface, be like, what? Like they're out there cowboying, you know what I mean? I think that's a lot of people's reaction. But if you actually read through the report, it's like, yeah, it's early on in the fire, and one of the main values at risk was a mine, and they're out there doing their job, scouting things and trying to come up with a plan. And of course, it's a dynamic scenario, and it's kind of like, here's that tough call, right? Like you're there, and you can see that the fire's coming, and here's a value at risk. Of course, you don't have all the resources that you need. But you do actually have some skill and some background in this, and that bias for action, which we promote in a lot of ways, and it's only, I was a pretty kind of staunch supporter, and I still am, for bias for action, and I recognize some of the downsides of it. I think I used to be kind of deaf to, the people pointing out the downsides of bias for action.
I can't see that coming from you at all, Travis. Super inconsistent with my observations.
Yeah, I jump first and then evaluate later. So they're out there just scouting, right? And then it's like, hey, like if we don't do something now, this value at risk that we're here to protect is going to be impacted. And so they do a firing operation, and it's a impromptu kind of like, hey, let's get some black. And I can totally understand being in that scenario, where you're just like, man, this is grass, and we could do some good here, but we got to do it now if we're going to do it. And so they set up and they put a little fire on the ground, and seems to be working, and then fire whirl comes through and just right over the top of one of the people that's igniting, and get some burns. And we've had that happen before, multiple places, but Nevada specifically, right? That those wind events like that, they can do that. And like I said, when there's fire on the ground, that's part of the risk.
One of the terms they used multiple times to kind of describe it was the an anomalous event or whatever, like an anomaly that, how do you predict the anomaly of a fire whirl developing? And I think, if you read this report, and again, there's lots that's redacted, but there's a great conversation right there, right? How do you predict that? How do you react? What do you do? What are some things that, what can you control? And, stuff like that, having that conversation, because it's pretty, it's pretty intense, even though it's hard to read with all the the Sharpie on the page, you still find yourself like going, anxious to get to the next paragraph and figure it out, because it's a pretty wild story. Somebody's getting ready to fire pin flares and this thing comes at them, pretty interesting for sure. Worth the read. And I'm glad we included this one.
Absolutely. And this is one of those instances that I would point to as like, hey, man, LCES isn't going to save you from every entrapment scenario that's possible. There are times when fire moves so unexpectedly that having a lookout isn't actually, and where we have people placed just because of, operational needs, right? If we're going to do this operation, we're going to have to put people here. And it's not, the LCES doesn't work fast enough for how fast fire can be sometimes, and especially something weird like a fire whirl.
An anomalous event.
An anomalous event, right? Like, a really surprising change in wind that's just periodic or whatever, or even undetected spot fire. And I know that people could say, "Well, then the lookout you didn't have enough lookouts or whatever," and we can argue that, but it's just that it's not bulletproof. LCES is not fireproof, I should say. That's awesome, and you better do it. But it is. There are times when it's still going to happen because we're dealing with.
Yep.
Unpredictable. We're really good at forecasts, but we can't predict with precision what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so, just if you check this one out and you see the headline part of it where it's like, IMT overhead gets caught during a firing operation, and you go, ooh, what were they doing? I would encourage you to read it and understand kind of everything that goes into it. Which is true of any incident.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never stop at just the header.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Firing device mishaps?
That was well, the one that jumped out to me like, huh, for real? I thought it was just like urban legend that somebody had used a bladder bag filled with,
Drip
mix to go light piles. That just seemed, I had never seen that write up, and I thought it was just urban legend. But no, it happened.
So can you put yourself in that scenario? Say you're hiking up to this pile or whatever, and you see somebody carrying a bladder bag, whatever, and you get up to the top, and it's just you and your crew, and then they're like, oh no, this is drip mix. Like, do you know what your reaction would be?
I mean, it's easy to think what it might be, but it seems like I'd be going, that is like ridiculously dangerous. It could come, the fire, I mean, because we all know like dumping fuel on a fire is so high risk, and that's essentially what you're doing, right? Like, I mean, it seems, I don't know what the person was thinking at the time, but it seems a little crazy.
But I think that what they're saying is that, like, hey, this was a common practice. Like, they'd learned it from somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. And I can totally understand the transport. Like, I'd way rather carry a bladder bag than a fiver.
But think about the leaking. Have you
Yeah.
ever carried a bladder bag that doesn't leak? I would say I
Understand.
probably never have. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
That, to me in itself, that's,
I've flipped them upside down.
yeah, that's true. They're better.
And so if you're going from one place to another, right, and you flip it, but it's still like you're gonna get, it's not gonna not leak, but at least it's not pressure on that outlet portion. And so from the transport thing, I'd be like, oh, that's smart, And then it's like once the fuel's in the bladder bag, like you're not gonna not try squirting it out of there.
Totally. Well, I always liked when I used to burn a lot of piles, like I liked having the propane torch on my back because it was easier to carry and you just had the little, igniter. I liked that better than the drip torches because those can spill and they're, just kind of a pain too. So I get the ease of it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, if they had seen it work in the past,
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? It's just,
sure.
again, practices get passed on.
Well, and when you read this, I mean, it seems like they handled it really well. Like, let's talk about it. It's not
Sure.
like, what the heck? It's like,
Yeah.
let's talk about this. How, and if it's how you were taught or whatever,
Yeah.
there you go.
But then they walk through some of the like, okay, that wand is not designed for that, right? And there's actually
Exactly,
some
yeah.
danger, which they realized. Realized in it happened right? When they went to
Yeah.
that it sucked fire back in or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that, and then there's the two instances in there of
Burn stubbies.
yeah, the stubbies catching fire on it. In one instance it was in a pack, in a line pack. You know what I mean? Like where you would maybe have some water bottles in that space, and then like you're going to be burning through, so you throw a bunch of stubbies in that.
Yeah. I love the description too. Like they could hear the stubby that, the firefighter and co-firefighter, they could hear it. They're looking around and then, oh my gosh, it's in my pack. That would be pretty crazy.
Classic. Like you're turning around.
Yeah. Where is that?
I still hear it, and you're expecting to see it out there on the ground someplace.
Yeah.
And I've had, like I remember initial attack on an engine, and it was salt cedar, and just the way that stuff burns. And I remember the next day looking at my pack, and it was full of holes, burn holes.
Yeah.
And I never realized it, but I mean, it was like there was just a bunch of holes on my pack, and some of them almost like a quarter size.
Yeah, if you'd had a stubby in your water bottle.
Yeah, if there was a stubby in there, like that could have happened, especially with that little brown cardboard cap pops off, which they often do, and then that fuse starts to unravel. And I never would have thought of that. I never would have, been like, well, I better not put these in here because an ember randomly could land on it and ignite it, and then I would have a burning pan. Like, I don't think that way.
What about having one in your pocket like we see in the Bosque Ditches prescribed fire burn injury?
So that IA that I was talking about where I had the holes in my pack, that was at Bosque. I used to work there, and I got there right after this event had happened that we highlight here, and he just had them in his pocket, same kind of deal, just hey, we're going out to burn and we might use these, so he puts them in the pocket. Same thing, it unraveled, and that fuse was out and happened to get lit, and it went all the way and ignited in his pocket.
Oh, that's terrible.
And those things burn hot. Because, and I know this is the case because in the office there, they had, how a lot of us have our keys, like on a little rope or whatever in our pocket.
Piece of pea cord or something.
Yeah, exactly. He had that, and he had a pretty good stack of keys, and it fused those keys together. And it was like a pile of metal. Just kind of, it got that hot in his pocket. And I remember looking at those keys just going, oh my gosh, yeah, same thing. I wouldn't think of throwing a few of those things in my pocket just to have handy.
Yeah.
But we're playing with fire. Like, man, super scary. I wouldn't, I wouldn't immediately chalk that up to, bad SA or anything. It's just normal ops, right?
Yeah.
And stuff like that happens. But here we are. We get to, tell this dramatic story. And the next time you go out, somebody out there goes out and says, I'm going to throw some stubbies in my pocket. It's entirely plausible for them to go, hey, remember that story about the keys that got fused in that guy's pocket? Like, maybe I'll at least make sure that the fuse doesn't pop out, or, hey, let's keep them in the truck or whatever. This is like a very tangible lesson, man. Keep track of those stubbies.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, that's a good tangible lesson.
I'd say so. I hope, when folks read this, they do sort of, it doesn't have to be read in one sitting for sure, but it is designed to sort of be like a look at firing ops and a look at some of these incidents. So it is fun to read them sort of collectively. So I think you took the definite lead here from our staff in helping pick the incidents. I think you did an awesome job.
Yeah, you bet. And like I said, man, if there's one lesson that people can walk away from any of those, one of them might resonate with you either by where it is that you operate, what part of the country, or a shared experience like, oh man, I had something like that. But yeah, just like you said, look through this issue of Two More Chains, and either, get in the incident review database, review these things, or one of them that resonates, print it out and talk with your crew about it. And then more than anything, just, internalize a few of these lessons so that when you're out there, you get the advantage, right? That's the whole idea, man, is we want to give people the advantage. When we're out there, we don't need to gamble any more than we already do. If we have lessons, we should put them into play.
And I'd say get clicking. Again, that's the not so secret little intent from us too, is get into the incident review database on the new website and do some clicking and check things out. And I'm sure if we all think about it, we all have our favorite older reports that we can pull out and review those lessons, but get clicking, check it out. Let us know if you find stuff that's missing or there's an issue on the website, we're still working. We're working on phase 2, so it's a good chance to get some really good feedback from people.
Yeah, and then also we're not even discussing it on this, but that one of our own interview that we talked about earlier with Shannon is less like, man, that's worth it right there. Get that 2 more chains and
it's really I think it's pretty. I mean, like I said, I've known Shannon quite a while, but I thought it was pretty inspiring. Just his take, someone who's been in operations for such a long time, and has intentionally chosen to stay. Not to go and try and be base manager or FMO or fire director, whatever you want to. He loves what he does, and that's always inspiring to me. So,
absolutely. So,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Use the lessons.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I will sign off now then, huh?
Yeah.
Thanks to Travis for the chat and for being so versed in the incidents we discussed. We're lucky to have him on the staff with his lens constantly focused on learning. As a reminder, there are thousands of learning reports and accident reviews housed in our incident review database. Visit lessons.wildfire.gov to find scenarios and lessons that resonate with you. Talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Wildfire Lessons podcast. Be sure to subscribe, share, give us a review. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Wildfire Lessons. Music provided by second-generation smoke jumper Steve Baker, who always likes to keep one foot in the black. Thanks, Steve. Remember, we honor through learning.